You must remember this, a kiss is still a kiss, a sigh is just a sigh. The fundamental things apply as time goes by. And when two lovers woo, they still say I love you, on that you can rely. No matter what the future brings as time goes by.
My wife. Hi, honey. I'm hovering over I-86. Traffic, bumper to bumper. No, I can't drop in on your relatives in Johnson City. I'm a cloud. You wanted low-lying vapor? You should have married Foggy. What am I doing today? Just watch Weather on the 10s on YNN. With updates every 10 minutes, you can always keep track of me. Yes, I'll be home in time for your sister's shower. Love you.
If you have VHS, SVHS, 3/4, or Betamax videotape, 8, Super 8, or 16 millimeter film, family pictures, or slides you'd like converted to DVDs, contact Huckabone Media Services. If you have audio cassettes or reel-to-reel tapes you'd like on CDs, give us a call. All of our work is performed locally and quickly at competitive prices. Huckabone Media Services, 20 years of experience with video and audio conversions. I'm very pleased to be talking today with Roger Conklin. Roger is a longtime broadcaster in the Binghamton area. Thanks for being here, Roger.
My pleasure, Bob.
How about we start off with you? Give us some information on your background and growing up, that kind of thing.
Well, I'm a native of the area, lived here all my life. Went to local schools. I graduated from Binghamton North High School. And I've stayed in the area, married, and raised our children here.
Okay. How did you get into broadcasting?
Interesting that my senior year of high school at Binghamton North, I really didn't have any kind of a career in mind. I happened to look on the back of a magazine, and there was an ad in there for a radio and television school of broadcasting in New York City. And I read that, and it seemed like that was kind of an interesting thing to do. So I applied for it and then went off to New York City to attend school.
Wow. And so you learned radio and television?
Yes, radio and television, primarily television. It was designed more for studio work and control room work. We learned the audio boards, the control boards, directing, set design, lighting, camera work. So all phases of television. The radio portion of it basically was kind of secondary.
How long was it?
It was a 6 months course.
6 months?
Yep, that was all there was to it.
Boy, they poured a lot into 6 months, huh?
Yes, it was interesting. It was run by a number of employees of the networks. At that time, Dumont and NBC, CBS, and their executives or people on their staff would teach the courses.
So you came out of the school.
Came out of school.
It was called the Radio
Television Broadcasting School of New York City.
Okay. And what then?
Came back to the area and, of course, applied to, at that time, the only television station, which was WNBF.
Yeah, when was that?
That was in 1955.
Okay.
And was not hired right away, but there was an opening for a summer replacement. While people were going on vacation, they needed somebody. So it was not designed to begin with to be a full-time position, but I jumped at the chance, and I was hired to do the summers, and consequently they kept me, and from there it went on.
So what did you do in that summer?
Basically just studio work with camera. Okay. Once in a while I'd have to go over to the radio side because I'd fill in for lunch breaks and supper breaks, running the board.
Okay. Oh, at that time, they had an engineer and an announcer?
As you know, Bob, back during the day, this was the mid-50s, the announcer sat in the studio and all he did was follow the script. He read the log, and the engineer did everything else. We were in a separate studio, but we looked through the window. And it was because I didn't do radio a lot, and I only did it for an hour a day during these periods when I need to do relief, it got to be kind of interesting.
Yeah. So you point at the announcer when his mic is on? And
Basically, that was it. We
Yeah.
had the control room that I sat in. We had 2 turntables on my left. We had one on my right, control board in the middle, and over to my left shoulder we had a tape deck. And our job was to follow the log, play the commercials. Now, Bob, at that time, they were all on electrical transcriptions. They were big discs. And there were a number of different commercials on there. They could be anywhere from 10, 30, 60 seconds. There might have been 25 or 30 on there. And you had to put the needle just in the right spot to play that commercial when it came up.
Yeah.
So you had 2 turntables running. You had the songs on another turntable, and if you had any local commercials that were taped, you had the tape deck behind you. So when you were all done, your hands are moving, pushing buttons, and it's kind of interesting.
Wasn't it fun?
It was a lot of fun. It really was.
So that was your first summer then?
That was my first
Okay.
summer. Then this goes back to the Arlington Hotel, Bob.
Okay.
This is when WNBF television was in the Arlington Hotel in the basement. We then moved over to Henry Street, which was then called the Cufrian Building. And during that period, I went over to the new station and basically did the same job.
Okay. In television?
In television, yeah.
Okay.
Still
And-
doing relief work in radio, but basically television.
And so you operated, your main job was operating camera then?
Yep, main job was operating camera. Once in a while, I'd have to fill in on the audio board in the studio.
What were some of the programs that you worked on?
Well, we had Ralph Carroll's Carol Caravan. Interesting guy Ralph Carroll was. And then we had
What did Ralph do?
Ralph was basically talked about some of his travels, because he traveled a lot, and then he would take films, bring them back, and show them to different organizations, show them on the air. He had guests, bring in guests from various organizations, and just a general talk show.
Okay. The Ralph Carroll
Ralph Carroll Caravan.
Caravan.
Yeah.
What other shows were there?
Then there was the Stop, Look, and Cook, which we did the cooking show. That was always the best part of the day because we got to eat the food. We had lunch prepared. Did Stop, Look, and Cook. Then there was the Bill Parker TV Ranch Club. Worked with Bill Parker for a number of years. Then on Sundays, and I didn't work Sundays very often, but when I had to during relief times and fill-in times, it was pretty interesting in the morning because we had 2 studios over in the new building. And one studio, we would do the morning news and those kinds of shows and information shows. But we also did the Little White Church. And that was mic'd very complex because they had not only the speaker, the preacher speaking, we had a choir, we had soloists. So we had to mic that.
And now that was in the studio,
That
or
was
was
in
that
the
remote?
studio. No, that was in the
In the
studio.
studio.
They came in every Sunday morning. They knew what they were doing, and we just had to kind of follow the script along. And then right after that, Tom Cawley had a show on. He was working for the Binghamton Press as a reporter, and he had a show right on after that. We had to go from the one studio in 60 seconds over to the other studio and start broadcasting his show.
But it was all set up.
Everything was
The
all
cameras,
set up.
everything was set up. So the crew just went from one studio to the other?
We moved the studio cameras over.
Oh, the cameras
Oh
went
yeah, there was
too?
great big wide doors, and all we did is just push them through.
Oh, wow.
So it was not, those cameras were easy. They had big dollies, and they were easy to move.
You didn't get any lunch break or
I
anything
know,
like
we
that?
moved pretty fast.
Oh, wow.
But that was kind of an interesting Sunday, but I didn't do that very often.
Were there, what, 2 cameras, 3
Yes,
cameras?
2 cameras.
I'll be darned.
Yeah, yeah.
Wow. So, where'd you go after that? Or what happened after
Well, after that, unfortunately, I was caught up in a labor dispute,
Oh,
and the union went out on strike. We were out on strike for 17 months. As a result, we were owned by Triangle Publications out of Philadelphia, and their desire was to break the union, and they accomplished what they desired to do. So we all lost our jobs. There's 31 of us went out on strike, and 30 of us never went back.
wow. Well, some went, I guess, to Channel 40.
Well,
that
after
time.
that, yes.
Yeah.
Now this was in '56, so Channel 40 had not signed on
Oh,
the air
that's
yet.
right. Oh,
So
yeah.
still just the one television
So
station.
all the guys are out of work.
They were all out of work and went to various places. Some of them went into retail, some of them went to selling insurance. So they had various jobs around. Some of them went into industry, worked for General Electric. Some of them went to IBM. So we did get jobs. And then after that, I went into retail. I was in retail for about 10 years working for, at that time, the Grandway stores.
Oh, in Grandway, in Binghamton Plaza?
Binghamton Plaza, the Vestal, and then they had one in Endicott also. And I became a manager with the stores and stayed in there for about 10 years.
So you were the manager
One of the managers.
at Grandway?
In Grandway, yeah.
Wow.
In the Binghamton Plaza.
Great.
Then the hours were getting pretty long. We started at that time, they started opening on Sundays. They were keeping people there till 11 o'clock at night during the holidays. And I said, I don't really want to do this. So I found a position with WINR television radio as a
At this time, no, so this was what time?
1968.
In 68?
About 68. Mhm.
No, 58.
68.
68,
About 1968.
Okay.
Yeah.
And so you went to WYNR television?
Television.
And radio?
And radio. Basically radio. I was an account executive with radio. And stayed there until, I believe it was around 1970, almost 1972. About 1972. And then in that time period, WINR was owned by the Binghamton Press,
Right.
radio and television. They divested of that and was bought by WICZ television.
Stainless.
Yeah, stainless. And Ed Scala.
But they kept the radio, didn't they?
They kept the radio.
Yeah.
And then Ed Scala was the general manager of the INR, and he went over to WNBF as a sales manager, and he called me one day and offered me a position as a sales manager or salesperson over at WNBF, and that's when I started at WNBF and spent 28 years with them.
Okay, wait a minute now. So Ed Scala, I thought Ed was the general manager at Channel 40, or was that afterward?
That was afterwards.
So Ed was the sales manager then at WNBF radio or television or
Radio.
radio,
72.
Okay.
He hired me.
and you were there for how long?
Until 98.
Really?
26 years.
At WNBF radio.
WNBF radio.
And so you started out then as a salesman, account executive.
Account executive.
That's I guess a fancy name
Yeah,
for a
well,
salesman.
sounds good. We sold airtime.
Yeah. Okay.
We sold air.
Okay.
That was our product, air.
And then and then what? You became sales manager then? Or?
I became sales manager. Well, right after I started over there, WNBF was sold to Stoner Broadcasting, the radio and television or radio division, which was WNBF AM and FM back then. And they were sold to Stoner Broadcasting out of Des Moines, Iowa. So in '72, I started working for Triangle Publications once again. They sold the radio and the television. I became employed by Stoner Broadcasting, and that's when I stayed with them.
Now, I had thought, I believe when I came here in 1970, that you had an advertising agency.
For a short period of time.
Oh, okay.
Short period of time, I was associated with an advertising agency and found that I didn't really like that at all.
Uh-huh.
I liked being in the actual business of the radio business, and so I went back to my job.
When you first started in radio, what were some of your accounts? Do you remember?
Oh gosh, you're testing my memory.
Okay.
Some car dealers,
Uh-huh.
and one of them was Fowler's department store, which was a big newspaper user. That was a difficult account to crack.
But at that time, there weren't that many radio stations when you started there. Well,
No,
what were there?
no. There was
Three?
there was WINR, radio, there was WENE, AM, and then it became FM, MRV, when Merle Griffin bought them. WKOP, which was an old radio station, been around for a long time. That may have been the only ones.
Okay. So, did that make it less difficult to sell?
Yes, it was much easier at that time.
Yeah.
Yeah. Proliferation of the stations as it is today is much different than it was back then.
So then you became sales manager, was that it?
Became sales manager, that's right. I was sales manager for a number of years of WNBF and WHWK. And then became the vice president and general manager.
If you have VHS, SVHS, 3/4, or Betamax videotape, 8, Super 8, or 16 millimeter film, family pictures, or slides you'd like converted to DVDs, contact Huckabone Media Services. If you have audio cassettes or reel-to-reel tapes you'd like on CDs, give us a call. All of our work is performed locally and quickly at competitive prices. Huckabone Media Services, 20 years of experience with video and audio conversions.
YNN.com is better than ever with expanded video content. Click on the expanded video link to see bonus footage and extended interviews from today's news stories, plus custom weather forecasts and exclusive YNN show clips. How to get all this great stuff? Just follow the instructions on our website for how to sign in and get full access to all our resources. YNN.com. Don't miss a second of our online content.
Exclusively for Time Warner Cable television customers.
What were the years when, do you recall, when you were a sales manager, and when did you become general manager? Do you recall that?
I believe, well, I became sales manager of WQYT, which was WNBF FM, the Quiet Island. Great radio station. Everybody loved the station, but there weren't very many FM stations or radios around. Cars didn't have them. Very few homes had them. So to go out and sell advertising for a radio station that really nobody could get wasn't as easy as it could be.
Okay. And so then you were sales manager at WQYT, WHWK. Well, when it became WHWK, they got some ratings.
Oh yeah, that was then become the #1 radio station as I expect it is today.
Right. And then you became general manager of the two stations?
The two stations, right.
Okay. So I take it then, Roger, that you were there in a real changing period in broadcasting.
Oh, yes.
So you were there, and correct me if I'm wrong on this, but I believe that it was in the Reagan administration where a lot of the regulations were just thrown out.
That's right.
The NAB code, equal time, that kind of thing.
A lot of things changed during that period of time.
And you were...
Yeah, I was involved in broadcasting during that whole transitional period.
And you were general manager at that time?
Yes.
What effect did this have on your operation?
Well, it had a big effect as I look back on it today. As it was happening, it didn't seem as though it probably was as important as I look back and see it now. The regulations were, at that time, you could only own AM and FM, or 2 AMs or 2 FMs in a marketplace. You couldn't own any more than that. Now, once those regulations were kind of thrown out the window, then you were able to buy other radio stations or put them on the air in the same market. What happened then is they became mega radio stations ownership, where they would have up to 100 radio stations, and they may own 4 or 5 or 6 in the same marketplace. So that changed everything dramatically.
Now, and you were with Stoner when that happened?
I was with Stoner Broadcasting.
Now, did Stoner then pick up other stations and expand into other markets?
We had stations in Des Moines, Iowa, Dayton, Ohio, Knoxville, Tennessee, Rochester, Buffalo, of course, Binghamton, New Orleans at one time. So we had stations across the country.
was it under Stoner that more radio stations locally came under the umbrella there?
Not really. It was shortly after that the rules were released, regulation was lessened, that Stoner Broadcasting merged with Atlantic Radio. We then became American Radio Systems. American Radio Systems was out of Boston, and the owners of that wanted to expand because of the new regulations. So then they started buying stations all across the country. And during that merger, they wanted to get into big markets. The Detroit, Chicago, Phoenix, Orlando, Boston. So the big markets was where they really wanted to buy radio stations. So I knew the handwriting was on the wall for Little Binghamton, New York, that eventually we were going to be spun off, and that's what happened.
So when that happened, you had 2 radio stations.
That time, yes.
Okay.
Yes.
And so then, who were you spun off to?
Well, after we left ownership of American Radio Systems, we were spun off to corporate people out of Park Avenue in New York. These were money managers. Had very little background in radio. Their background was in making money. And our corporate office became in Texas, and we had only 4 radio stations at that time, and that was Wix Broadcasting. Now, during the Wix Broadcasting,
you said 4 radio stations.
there were 4 radio stations in our little chain.
How did you? So you picked up what, WKOP?
Well, what we did locally was I put a new station on the air. That we built that from the ground up. That was WYOS. It became the oldies station. We had an oldies format, very successful. But once we put that on the air, we had 3 stations here in Binghamton. At a corporate meeting one time, one of the principal money people asked me what if they were to buy more radio stations in the Binghamton market, what would I buy? My suggestion, I told them WAL and WKOP. They proceeded to buy those 2 stations. So now we have 5 radio stations that I was managing. And we had 2 in one location, 3 in another location. So now we have to start merging, putting them together.
Okay. They were owned by Andy Jarima at that time? Or not?
No, they were not owned by Andy at that time. Andy had sold them.
Oh, okay.
And the life of me, I don't even remember the name of the people that owned
I come to think of it, when the Clark Cook Group.
Yeah, Clark Cook had bought from Andy Jarima.
Yeah, and then apparently, well.
Then they had.
Yeah, but
and then Clark
how did putting all these radio stations together affect you as a manager?
Pretty interesting, I'll tell you that. I'd
Yeah.
never thought about it before. I thought managing 2 radio stations and then 3 was quite a task. But then now we have 5.
Right.
And I spent half a day at one group of stations, and then I'd run down the street to the other 2 and spend half a day down there. But in this period of time, I started looking for real estate where we could move the 5 radio stations into one location. It took us about a year to find the right location. There are technical problems that we had to address with line of sight to transmitter and various things that had to go into play before we get the right location. So Doug Matthews from the Matco Group called me one day and said, I'd like to show you a building in downtown Binghamton that might suit your needs. So I met with him down on the corner of State and Court Street, which was then the Key Bank building. Key Bank had moved out of there and moved up the street. So that was first floor, and the basement was available. So we looked at it, and we looked at the amount of space we had and how we would be able to design the studios, the administrative offices, the sales offices, and that seemed to work for everything that we really needed to do. So they did the build out for us. This was in 1997, and we moved over the Thanksgiving weekend. It's a 3-day weekend for people. So we had moved over the Thanksgiving weekend, started on a Friday, moved the 5 radio stations were back on the air, never lost any airtime. And we were in the new studios on Monday in our new building.
Who was involved in the move?
Larry Hodge was our engineer at the time. Larry did a fantastic job of moving this all.
That had to be
It was a tremendous job, and I never thought I would go through a process like this before because there were so many details. The engineering details I left to him because I'm not an engineer. I did not know anything about what needed to be done, and I relied heavily on his expertise, and he did a wonderful job with it. One of the big problems we had was, of course, we talked about the money managers that really didn't know anything about broadcasting. And when I talked about new equipment and installation and so on, they said, well, what's wrong with your old equipment? I said, well, you can't just move it one day and have it in place the next. I mean, there's a lot that goes into it. Well, I said, they just go off the air for a couple weeks. I said, we're right in the middle of rating period.
Yeah.
So,
wow.
So obviously that didn't work.
Yeah.
So when we got everything done, I was very pleased with it. But even having to determine how many, the telephone system we have to use, because we did a lot of talk shows. We had a lot of call-in. So our telephone system had to be redone in a way which we could be able to receive these calls and transfer them into the control room and have a number of lines that were available. And so even designing the telephone system, I wasn't up to speed on that, but I sure came quick.
How long did it take Larry, and I'm sure a crew, how long did it take to get, this was on Henry Street?
That was on the corner of Court and State,
Court and
where they currently are today. They're still in that location.
Oh, okay, over there. At one time, I thought they were on Henry Street.
When we moved from the Sheraton, we went over to Henry Street, which is Central Plaza, and that was WMBF, AM and FM.
Yeah. And you were general manager with that move too?
No.
No?
No, I was just, that's when it was WMBF, and we changed to WQYT.
Yeah. So that must have been something to move all those stations.
Oh,
let me ask you this: you were owned by, you say, money men.
Yeah.
How was the profit in that period?
Profit was very good.
Oh,
we were very profitable radio stations, the most profitable in the marketplace.
Oh, there's no question about that.
Yeah.
In fact, over the years, WNBF radio has always been a leader. Even in today, when in many markets, AM stations have gone dark or quiet.
Interesting how we kept WNBF, because it had been like the premier AM radio station in the marketplace for many, many years. It signed on the air in 1927, so it's been around a long time. During the transitional period when you went from the AM to FM, and FM became much more popular, as it is today.
Right.
A lot of the AM radio stations went dark. They went off the air. One of the things that saved us was going to talk radio. Heavy on news and talk radio. Now, I put Rush Limbaugh on the air. I had our engineer, Larry Hodge, tape it off from satellite, and I listened to it on a cassette on my way home. The first time I heard that, I said, no way will Binghamton ever accept this program. But I kept listening, and I read more about it, and I went to a couple of radio conventions, and the talk was Rush Limbaugh, Rush Limbaugh. Oh. So I said, okay, this is what we're going to do. We're going to put Rush Limbaugh on the air in the afternoon, where he still is today, same hours. The first day that went on the air, the telephones lit up like a Christmas tree.
Yeah. Good or bad?
Well, I told our receptionist, don't even try to answer them. Feed the calls into me. I'll take care of them. And we got 100 and some negative calls. I mean, people were really hot. As time went on, people got used to it, and now it's a very, very popular show.
There's some, I don't know, is it magic about WNBF radio or the people that have brought it, but as far as I know, it has always been a successful operation. And even today, when stations are scrambling to get listeners, WNBF radio just seems to be steady all the way through.
We've been very fortunate. I think a lot of things over the years. First of all, we had a tremendous amount of talent and good people. We had a lot of longevity. A lot of radio stations do not have longevity. They come 1 year, 2 years, 3 years, they're gone.
Rating book to rating book.
Rating book to rating book. Now, the announcers, that's a little different thing, but we had a good administrative staff that's been there for many, 25, 30 years. And they love what they're doing. They're very good at what they're doing. I work with some tremendously talented and dedicated people. And I think that's one of the things that helped us. And we always tried to rise above. We were always professional in whatever we did. We always made sure that we went out into the public and we had a good image, no matter what it was. And we were very community involved.
My wife. Hi, honey. I'm hovering over I-86. Traffic, bumper to bumper. No, I can't drop in on your relatives in Johnson City. I'm a cloud. You wanted low-lying vapor? You should have married Foggy. What am I doing today? Just watch Weather on the 10s on YNN. With updates every 10 minutes, you can always keep track of me. Yes, I'll be home in time for your sister's shower. Love you.
If you have VHS, SVHS, 3/4, or Betamax videotape, 8, Super 8, or 16 millimeter film, family pictures, or slides you'd like converted to DVDs, contact Huckabone Media Services. If you have audio cassettes or reel-to-reel tapes you'd like on CDs, give us a call. All of our work is performed locally and quickly at competitive prices. Huckabone Media Services, 20 years of experience with video and audio conversions.
Why don't you talk a little bit about, you mentioned all the people involved. Who were some of those people?
Well, I
And
mentioned,
what did they do?
well, I mentioned Ralph Carroll and what he did, and Bill Parker. And of course, Bill Parker's still around today, and I think see Bill on occasion, and he's just a great talent and a humble human being. And this is one of Bill's biggest assets, is that he's just a common guy, you know. Then I worked with Hank Hancock. I don't know if anybody remembers Hank Hancock, but he did a show called Meet Your Neighbor on television at 1 o'clock in the afternoon. That was another one of these talk shows, you know, and he had guests and so on. Bill Parker's TV Ranch Club, I worked that show, and that was an interesting show to watch and to work. I worked with, in the broadcasting, we worked, of course, with John Leslie, with Ted Baer. Ted Baer was an interesting morning man.
Yes.
And it was very successful in the marketplace.
Yeah.
And of course, John Leslie went on to be probably the best known and best morning talk show hosts that we ever had.
Oh, yes.
So people still remember John Leslie in the area. So there were some interesting people that I worked with.
Well, who came up with all the promotions? Was it the personalities or promotion? Did you have a promotion director? Or?
We had a promotions, well, not so much. We had a program director for AM and FM for our radio stations. And they would come up with them, and the announcers would come up, and we allowed people to generate ideas and bring ideas to the table. And it wasn't, we didn't put people in boxes that this is your job, you know, this is what you got to do, and didn't let anybody else get involved. Anybody in the radio station that come up with an idea or promotion, we would entertain the idea, and not always did it work, or we would go with it, and many times the entire staff, I used to say I had my MBWA, and that was by management by walking around. I didn't spend a lot of time sitting behind my desk in the office. I like to walk around the station, talk to people, whomever came in, the guests, and I'd like to be involved into it. And I encouraged the staff to get involved in the total operation of the radio station.
So you were more of a hands-off type manager?
Pretty much.
Yeah.
Yeah. And that really came from being with Stoner Broadcasting. We were in a corporate office was in Annapolis, Maryland, and the president of our company and the CEO were down there, Tom Stoner. I wouldn't get a visit from them more than maybe twice a year. And but we'd have phone conversations. We had corporate meetings usually once every quarter, where we'd all get together. All the general managers and staff would get together and kick around ideas. But I liked being involved with people. And it was hands-off, and they were hands-off with me. That changed under Wicks Broadcasting. I had a micromanager.
Oh.
The president of the company was in San Antonio. He was in town about once every 3 weeks. He was on the phone with me at least 2 or 3 times a day.
Wow.
I couldn't hardly go to lunch with him, not calling, wanting to know what I was doing. So it was much, much different.
Yeah, that must have put a little pressure on you then.
It was. It wasn't the happiest time I had in broadcasting, but we made it work.
What was the happiest time you had in broadcasting?
Oh, I think during the period of Stoner Broadcasting, because of the autonomy and because of the foresight of the chairman of the board, Tom Stoner. I had some opportunities that in broadcasting that I probably would never have had with any other job. I got a phone call one morning, which was very interesting. Our receptionist called me and she said, "You have a call from the White House." I said, "Whoa." I thought, who was playing a joke on me this time, So I answered it, and the fellow's name was Jay Schwartz. He was the communications director for Clinton White House. And he invited John Leslie, our morning man, and myself down to Washington to hear a presentation by Hillary Clinton on her new health care plan. This was 1993. So I said, "Well, when do you want to do this?" He said, "Tomorrow." I said, "Whoa." So I called John at home. He'd already left the studio. I said, "You want to go to Washington and meet with Hillary Clinton?" And, "Well, what's going on?" So I told him the story. He said, "Yeah." So we both hopped on a plane. We went to Washington that night. Next morning, went over to the White House, and we were with a group of other people. And Hillary gave her presentation. There was Donna Shalala there and all kinds of dignitaries. And at the end of the meeting, the president came out and spoke for a few minutes. But the highlight of it was our unguided tour in the White House.
Unguided?
Unguided. They said, "Do you want to go to the White House for a tour?" We said, "Sure." So we went into the White House, and they said, "You're only restricted. You can't go in the family quarters. You can't go in the Oval Office." We just wandered around, and we did. And it was just great. We could sit in the chairs, get our pictures taken, and it was a fabulous time. So that kind of thing I would never have been able to do without being in the broadcast business.
Right.
And so that was enjoyable.
And the whole point there was to introduce you to
And they said, they told John Leslie, "You can do your morning show from the White House lawn," and he did. That was an interesting event.
John liked to travel around, didn't he?
He did, yeah. The company encouraged it. They encouraged him to do these talk shows with the Soviet Union. I was very proud to be part of that, called World Talk. And we put together our committee of 6 people, and we broadcast from the Soviet Union broadcast to us, we broadcast to them. Putting that whole thing together took us over a year. Yeah. And that was an interesting trip.
Yeah.
Dorothy and I, my wife, went to the Soviet Union and spent some time over there.
Wow. Over the years, with the combining, I don't even know how many radio, I call it the WNBF group.
Right. Yeah.
It seems to change names every now and then. But there are, what now, 5 or 6 radio stations in the group here locally?
Let's see. Now we have NBF, WHWK, WAL, WKLP, and it was WYOS, and they changed the call letter, so there's 5.
5. How has the number of employees changed in that period of time?
Well, when I left in '98, I retired in '98. I was only in our new studio or new offices, I think, for 5 weeks, and I retired.
I see.
But I was at that time we had about 65 full and part-time people. So they got to be quite large. I would say the average when we had just the 2 radio stations, we had probably half that number, if that, maybe 26 to 28.
So as you combined, you were able to combine jobs and...
Yeah.
And so there was 65. How many, I'm sure you don't have accurate numbers, but how many do you suppose there are today?
The only ones that I can recall, and I may be off on this a little bit, but I would say right now there's probably, I would say maybe half dozen.
Really? Oh, there must be more than that.
Well, there may be.
I can name a few.
When I left, there was Roger Neal,
Uh-huh.
still there. Judy Zwerzinski was our business manager.
Judy Z. Uh-huh.
And which is now the general manager. She's still there.
Who's the general manager?
Well, you had to ask me that. Now
Oh,
I forgot her name.
I'm sorry.
Walsh.
Oh, okay.
Mary Beth Walsh.
Oh, okay.
Mary Beth.
Uh-huh.
And Bob Joseph.
Uh-huh. But aren't there others in the group? Aren't there other?
There are others that
I'm talking about overall employees.
I would say
There must be.
total announcers and all. Well, I'd say of the announcing staff, probably maybe up to 20.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But then you have salespeople.
Salespeople
you got-
come and go all the time.
Yeah, but then you have like accounting and
That's right, yeah.
Scheduling and that kind of thing.
And program directors and production people.
Sure.
News people. Of
Yeah.
course, Bob has been there since I think he was still in high school.
He was born there, wasn't he?
I think I think we sponsored a Boy Scout troop at
Uh-huh.
one time, and I believe Bob Joseph was a part of that Boy Scout troop.
Very nice.
I think so, and I don't know. He's been there forever.
Yeah.
Great guy.
Yeah. Well, I was just trying to get an idea of how the broadcast business has changed people-wise. Many of the stations are now on satellite.
Yes.
Some of the stations still have like a morning man. There used to be news competition. As far as I can see, WNBF Radio is the only station that has full-time news people.
That's right.
And so, obviously, the Reagan years had an effect.
Oh, tremendous effect.
Because, as I recall, you used to have to, I'm going back decades, you used to have to say what percentage you had of news, what percentage of public affairs, public service
Right,
announcements,
right,
and you'd have to, I forget, was it every year or every 6 months or something, you had to submit a report, and do they still have to do that, do you think?
Yes. Yes.
Yeah.
Well, I'm not sure to what extent it is today, but that was, of course, part of the responsibility of the management to make sure, and the program directors, that they kept proper information of the number of news stations they had, public service announcements that we had. And we had to send this all in to make verified so that we could keep our license, because that's what kept us in business.
And yet, some stations seem to have absolutely no news.
Yep.
And it used to be required, how much
They're
news?
required, yeah.
How much
That-
did you know?
Obviously, during that period of transition when they relaxed the regulations, I think that probably had been redefined so that it's not as much as it used to be. But WNBF has been a news radio station for many, many years, and there's no reason to change it.
No, none at all. What about what's your opinion, anyway, on the equal time provision disappearing, actually?
Well, there are so many radio stations, there's so many outlets today for people to get information and to get news, to get the news of the day, whether it's national, international, local. You can get it on off the internet, you can get it on your iPods, you can, that I don't know that it's as important today. You can get whatever information you want with diverse opinions on 100 different places.
What do you see as the future of broadcasting now?
Well, I think it's probably going to basically stay pretty stagnant the way it is. Those stations that are successful will continue to be successful. You're always going to have some people buying and selling and different money coming into the marketplace. Sirius Radio, which was introduced a few years ago, never has taken off like they had hoped it to be. I see where the CEO has just retired from Sirius XM Radio, Mel Carmazan. And so I think that has pretty much reached its peak. It's not as profitable as they thought it was going to be, but I think it'll still be around. People like to listen to it in their car. They can get in their car in California and drive to New York and listen to the same radio station the entire time. So it's got a lot of advantages. but it is a pay per, you have to pay for it monthly. And when you've got all these other radio stations that you can pick up free off the air, I don't think that's, to me, it's there and it'll stay, but it's not as big as I thought it was going to be.
Roger, I really appreciate your coming over and talking about this. It's one of those things that I'm afraid we're going to lose, all of this historical stuff. And I really appreciate you coming over and talking.
Thank you, Bob. I appreciated it, and I hope it goes well.
Okay.
My wife. Hi, honey. I'm hovering over I-86. Traffic, bumper to bumper. No, I can't drop in on your relatives in Johnson City. I'm a cloud. You wanted low-lying vapor? You should have married Foggy. What am I doing today? Just watch Weather on the 10s on YNN. With updates every 10 minutes, you can always keep track of me. Yes, I'll be home in time for your sister's shower. Love you.
If you have VHS, SVHS, 3/4, or Betamax videotape, 8, Super 8, or 16 millimeter film, family pictures, or slides you'd like converted to DVDs, contact Huckabone Media Services. If you have audio cassettes or reel-to-reel tapes you'd like on CDs, give us a call. All of our work is performed locally and quickly at competitive prices. Huckabone Media Services, 20 years of experience with video and audio conversions.
You must remember this, a kiss is still a kiss, a sigh is just a sigh. The fundamental things apply as time goes by. And when two lovers woo, they still say I love you, on that you can rely.